Harrison Okene, the sole survivor who managed to stay alive at the bottom of the sea for a full 2 days, without oxygen, without any equipment, is indeed the only person in the world to have done so. Was fortune favoring him, or was death simply unable to find him? Dear viewers, there is no doubt that the seas are terrifying, but this fear intensifies when we venture into the ocean. As we go deeper, the sea becomes lonelier, eerier, and more eager to claim human lives. 80% of the ocean is such that no human has ever reached, and obviously no one wants to. Yet despite this, ships, naval vessels, and even entire airplanes filled with passengers have sunk into the depths of the sea, from where no one has returned alive. But today's story revolves around a person who is both the luckiest and the unluckiest at the same time. Harrison Okene, hailing from Nigeria, was working as a cook on a tugboat. On the 26th of May 2013, the tugboat, along with 12 crew members, set off to assist an oil tanker in the Gulf of Guinea. Harrison was also present, 32 kilometers off the coast of Nigeria. In the Gulf of Guinea, an oil tanker had been stranded. This was a routine task for the tugboat operators, as their job was to tow ships or help them out of shallow waters. But today was not a normal day by any means. It was 4:30 in the morning, and as usual, they began to tow the oil tanker with ropes. Just as they were making progress, suddenly, a huge, terrifying wave rose from the sea and crashed onto the tugboat. The pressure was so intense that the tugboat flipped over, capsizing. The pressure was so severe that the ropes towing the oil tanker snapped, and the tugboat, separated from the ship, began to sink rapidly. And as is the case in such situations, panic had already set in among the 12 crew members inside. Most of the crew were sitting in their cabins, and unfortunately, their cabins were locked. This was because pirate attacks are quite common in this part of the sea, so for safety reasons, they had locked the cabins beforehand. Locking the cabins might have prevented pirates from entering, but against the sea's water, it was of no significance. The water was rapidly taking over the cabin, but fortunately Harrison had left the cabin for the bathroom before the boat flipped over. At the time the boat capsized, he was only in his underwear and was violently thrown against the bathroom ceiling. Before he could understand what was happening, water started to pour in through the bathroom's vent at a high rate. Somehow he managed to open the bathroom door. As soon as the door opened, the flow of water swept Harrison to another bathroom where there was an air pocket. By this time it was completely dark on the boat. So dark that Harrison couldn't even see his own hands. He could only feel that he was underwater, and his face was outside an air pocket, through which he could breathe. Then, the tugboat hit the ocean's bottom, and suddenly, there was silence. The tugboat was roughly 30 meters or about 100 feet below the ocean's surface, which is as tall as an 8-story building. Harrison, who had no experience swimming, was left utterly alone in the cold water and pitch darkness, wearing only underwear. He knew his chances of survival were almost none, since the air pocket he was breathing from could fill with water at any moment. Somehow, he decided to try to escape. By feeling around with his hands and diving underwater, he miraculously found another place with a comparatively larger air pocket. This was the engineer's office of the tugboat, where he decided to stay. Wearing only underwear, his body submerged in cold water, without anything to eat or drink, and with only as much oxygen as was in the air pocket. The air pocket was only 1.2 meters large. In such a small space, the amount of oxygen was limited, which could keep Harrison alive. Obviously, his chances of survival were still very slim there too. While he was in this state of fear, Harrison started hearing sounds. Yes, these were the sounds of sharks, seemingly consuming something. Although Harrison didn't see them, he was certain that the sharks had managed to reach his companions. Harrison, who was alive inside the jaws of death, started to use his mind. Flapping his arms and legs, he found some floating Coke cans, which he drank to prevent dehydration. Later, he found a floating mattress, on which, lying down, he managed to keep his chest above water. If he had stayed in the cold water any longer, he would have succumbed to hypothermia. In this condition, the body loses all its heat, which results in nothing but death. He had managed to save himself from dehydration and hypothermia, but there was one thing for which he couldn't find a solution: oxygen. The oxygen level in the air pocket was rapidly decreasing. Given the small size of the pocket he was in, it was estimated that there was only enough oxygen for a person to survive for about 60 hours. Harrison was alive, 30 meters below the ocean, inside a small room of the tugboat, within a small air pocket. 2 days had passed since the incident. The oxygen supply, which was already limited, was now only expected to last a few more hours. In the darkness, Harrison was now just waiting for his death. After the worst 2 days of his life, when he was close to death, he finally heard a knock. The sound of knocking. The crew of the oil tanker had sent a team of divers to search for bodies in the wreckage of the tugboat. They had no idea that someone was still alive in the wreckage 2 days later. Then, inside the engineer's room, Harrison saw light under the water, and his joy knew no bounds when he saw a rescue diver emerging from the water. The diver said that Harrison was only minutes away from death. His body was so exhausted that he couldn't even open his eyes. The divers immediately put an oxygen helmet on him and tried to normalize his oxygen levels. Harrison wasn't immediately brought out of the sea because the sudden pressure change could have caused his heart to fail. For this reason, a diving bell was requested first, and Harrison was placed inside it to be brought out of the sea. He stayed in the diving bell for the next 2 days, where the pressure was gradually decreased. After 2 days, Harrison was completely back to normal. Upon regaining consciousness, the first thing he said was that he would never again venture close to the sea. Harrison Okene is the first and perhaps the only person in the world to have spent the longest time at the bottom of the sea without any diving equipment and then to have been brought back alive. Those 2 days inflicted such deep wounds on him that he was haunted by nightmares for a long time. But finally, in 2015, Harrison overcame his fear by learning commercial diving. And today he works as a commercial diver,